Okay, so welcome everyone to our webinar on how the government plans its contracts. This is part 2 in a 4-part series on understanding the rules of government contracting. A recording of part 1, Understanding the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is available on our website. And at the end, we'll show a slide with a schedule for parts 3 and 4. So my name is Christina Kunkel, and I'm the Program Director for the Northern California Procurement Technical Assistance Center, or PTAC. Today, I'm just going to speak briefly about the services of the PTAC and SBDC programs before our procurement specialist, Christina Jones, begins her presentation. So the NorCal PPAC is a program of the NorCal SBDC. The PTAC and the SBDC are both federally funded and hosted by Humboldt State University Sponsored Programs Foundation up in Arcata, California. The NorCal PPAC is funded to provide free one-on-one counseling services on procurement topics to businesses in Del Norte, Humboldt, Mendocino, Shasta, Siskiyou, Solano, and Trinity counties, as shown on the map on your left in green. And these county restrictions are determined by the federal definitions of economically distressed counties. There are about 100 other PTACs across the United States. The NorCal SBDC is shown here on the map to the right. All of the colors represent different SBDC regions, and the NorCal SBDC is shown in red on the left-hand side. Their service area slightly overlaps the PTAC service area from the Oregon border in Del Norte County all the way down the coast to the Bay Area and down to Santa Cruz County. To apply for SBDC services, you can click on the blue link here to find the SBDC nearest you. And this webinar was funded with support from the NorCal PPAC and NorCal SBDC. If you're unsure which service center is appropriate for your needs and location, don't hesitate to contact me and I'll direct you to the appropriate resource. You'll receive an email immediately following this webinar with a request to submit a brief evaluation. You can simply reply to that email with any questions about your eligibility. So the NorCal PPAC provides 3 core services, all of which are free to clients within the PTAC service area. The first is one-on-one counseling. Our experienced procurement specialists can help you with SAM registration, DUNS numbers, certifications, crafting capability statements, GSA schedules, and any other government contracting topics. We can help you understand where your business fits in the government marketplace and how to market yourself. Your local SBDC can also provide one-on-one counseling on more general business topics like how to start a business, how to write a business plan, how to get a loan, and more. Second, we provide free webinars like this one and in-person workshops on government contracting topics. We'll show you a list at the end of this presentation of upcoming events, and we have some really great events coming up. These webinars and workshops are always free and open to anyone, regardless of location. And third, we can set you up with, those up within our service area with a free bid matching service with daily access to federal, state, and local opportunities catered specifically to your keywords and geographical location. We also post local opportunities on our Facebook page, so make sure you like our page. To apply for NorCal PTAC services, visit norcalptac.org, click on the big green button on the front page, and don't hesitate to call me if you have any questions about your eligibility for our services. My direct phone number is 707-826-3922, and don't worry if you didn't write that down, you'll get a recording of this presentation after the presentation is over. And the content of this presentation was provided by the Georgia Tech Procurement Assistance Center. So thank you, Georgia Tech. And just a quick housekeeping note, you are all muted to avoid distractions in the background. If you have any questions during the presentation, please move your mouse to the bottom of your screen. A black bar will appear as seen in this photo. Click on the chat button on the bottom middle of the screen to send a message. And Christina will have about 10 minutes at the end to answer questions. And you can feel free to enter your questions throughout the presentation, and she'll answer them at the end. So now I'm pleased to welcome NorCal PPAC Procurement Specialist, Christina Jones.
Thank you very much. Just give me a moment here to remove a couple of things from my screen. Okay, so again, our objectives here today are to get you familiar with how the government plans their contracts, and to let you know how you can participate in the process at an early stage. And so what we'll be talking about here today is what the federal government does to plan for contracts, but knowing the rules will give you insights on how most state and local governments work as well as far as planning their contracts. However, it's not identical, it's just a guideline. Okay, so the purpose is to ensure that the government meets its needs in the most effective, economical, and timely manner. And so what acquisition includes is planning, is market research. So knowing what it is that, that will best benefit the government, and that may be in the form of knowing from you as a vendor or the potential contractor what you can offer that will help the government meet a solution, which moves to my next point, which is identifying potential sources, which may be small business, maybe a particular small business like an 8A, a sole source, and determining the acquisition strategy. So what is the best strategy should we take? Should we set this aside only for small business? Should we set it aside as a sole source? Should we procure this as on a contract vehicle? So these are the things that we would determine after, or the government would determine after conducting market research. So planning is the first step. That's what we're going to talk about today. In future presentations, we'll talk about the contract formation and the administration as well. So are you prepared for a market research inquiry? So an inquiry can include a sources sought that is submitted through Federal Business Opportunities. If you're not familiar with that, you can go to FBO and actually put it in your NAICS code under advanced search or keywords and sole source and see, sources sought to look for opportunities that are available. And basically they are looking to you to find out, can you meet the need that they have? Do you have the product, the service that they are looking to procure? Another way is by industry events, also roundtables, where they conduct research as far as kind of learning what are the products and the services that are out there that will meet their needs. So to the right in the red box, these are some examples of questions that they may ask in this format, or they may ask them a little differently. So how can acceptable performance be measured? So for instance, is there a zero defect policy, or perhaps a 95% customer satisfaction rating? These are things that you would want to know. As a contractor, what is the biggest risk from the government's perspective we should consider when defining our requirements? So knowing what they consider to be big risk and how you can minimize those or eliminate will assist you in when you write your final proposal. What is a reasonable transition time from contract award to performance? So once the contract is awarded, when should it begin? When will performance begin? Will it be 30 days, 5 days? What are the expectations? Do you have a quality assurance plan, or what's expected within that plan? Are there any reasonable schedule? What is the reasonable schedule of time as far as to complete the task? And quantity discounts. For instance, if the government purchases 1,000 reams of paper, could a discount be offered that could be included in the contract schedule? So these are some of the questions that you may be asked and you should be familiar with. So let's talk about the commercial item determination. Basically, the government wants to limit the amount of research and development it has to do. So it wants to use products and services that are already established within the commercial marketplace. So FAR 2.101 has 8 different definitions of commercial items. You can view them all by visiting the FAR, but I'm going to just talk about 4 examples that are kind of common. So first off, any item other than real property that is a type customarily used by the general public or by non-governmental entities for purposes other than governmental purposes. So for example, a late model automobile. That will be an example of something that's commonly and customarily in use in the general public. Number 2, an item that evolved from an item described in number 1. So through advances in technology or performance. So for example, say a 2018 model of that same car, because it's still based on item number 1, however, it's advanced in technology or performance. That would be an example. Third would be a non-developmental item. So if the procuring agency determines the item was developed exclusively at a private expense and then sold to maybe state and local government, but could still be used by the federal government. So example would be like a specialized software with a military application. Some example items would be like protective vests, weapon scopes, things that were developed with private funds, but used for government entities outside of the federal government. And a fourth one that I'm going to share is services of a type offered and sold competitively in substantial quantities. So this is basically things that have been sold within the market that are services such as engineering, law, accounting, consulting, janitorial, food services. Those are some examples. So when is the government required to put together an acquisition plan? Always is the answer. They are always required to put this together, and it's a quite detailed plan that they put together, including the contracting officer, perhaps the program manager, and hopefully, in our case, for most of us, the companies here that are small business, the small business specialist or the small business professional will participate early in the acquisition process. So they're looking for, to one, acquire products that have an observable market price, so commercial items, we just discussed what those are. And that, secondly, they're looking to provide full and open competition as much as possible to the maximum extent. And we'll talk about what the differences are there as far as how small business gets involved and how those procurements become, for instance, set aside for small business versus full and open. So what's in an acquisition plan? We'll go through this. I'll give you some details on what's outlined in the plan, but this can be found in FAR Part 7.105. So first off, they will start with creating a brief statement of need in the program description. A lot of time you will see this at the beginning of the solicitation of the RFP, or perhaps at the beginning opening section of the statement of work, describing what they're looking for, what's the description of the program or the product that they need, and how they came about to this. Secondly, they'll be looking at applicable costs. What's the known cost in order to procure this item or service? The schedule, what are their capability strengths? Are there any? How compatible is the product that we are considering to procure with existing products or systems or programs that we have, so that it's complementary, they work together. Third, of course, is cost. Not necessarily in these order, but this is the way acquisition plan is laid out. What are the cost goals and methods? Is it a life cycle cost, like from beginning, from birth to the end of the product? What's involved in costing the product? What capabilities or performance characteristics are we looking for? So this is where, speaking of you, what capabilities are we looking from you as a contractor or a vendor? And what performance characteristics would be nice to have? Looking at establishing delivery or performance period requirements. In other words, in what time frame do these requirements need to be complete? What trade-offs are we willing to consider, and what are the consequences? What are the technical costs and risks and schedule risk? And what are the plans for acquisition streamlining? So, for example, are we going to hold a pre-solicitation conference? Are we going to have an industry day? Are we going to release a source of thought what are our plans to streamline and move this acquisition request forward in a streamlined manner. Okay, now we're going to talk about the pecking order, preferences in the acquisition process. So we've already told you that they're seeking full and open competition. And we also told you that they prefer commercial items that have already basically been used within the commercial industry. And now we're going to talk about how the FAR dictates the use of certain sources over others. And then, of course, where small business fits into that. So the government has required government supply sources. So before they decide to buy supplies from any outside vendor, they must first go through these steps. So within the agency that's procuring the item, do they have anything in their inventory that they can use that actually meets this requirement? Secondly, can they use excess from another agency? Are they part of any programs? Are there any programs that also provide this product or service? So like the Federal Prison Industries Program or Ability One, which those products and services are products provided by those who are blind or severely disabled. Finally, wholesale supply sources. So for instance, GSA has a wholesale supply warehouse, for instance, or online portal basically, where they can access products that have been in use that you can purchase for at a wholesale price. So they are required to look at all of those first. And this is just a side note. This last note here is that agencies are encouraged to use, for instance, GSA, MAC, and blanket purchase agreements, but they are not required. So this rule was adjusted in 2013 to encourage them, but not require them to use those different contract vehicles. So let's talk about some definitions. So an interagency acquisition, it's basically a procedure where an agency, they obtain their supplies or services from another agency. So they just go out to another agency and don't, something they would look at before they go out to a private vendor. Multi-agency contract, meaning basically one agency is going to establish the procurement requirement, but then once it is procured, it's going to be used by multiple agencies. And a government-wide acquisition contract, this is referring to IT products or services established by one agency for use government-wide. So when a need can't be met by one of the required sources that we just discussed, what commercial sources are preferred by the government? And of course, that's small business. Small business is, as you know, there's a 23% requirement, a goaling requirement for small business. So this is the next, after they've met the required or reviewed the required source list, this is their next source of effort. So here's a list of the small business types. We've reviewed these in previous webinars, and I'm sure you're familiar with these, but these are just the different types of small business set-asides that they can, how they can procure it. So if you need more detail on that, of course, you can talk with, you can review webinars that we have on our website, or you can talk with one of our procurement counselors. And here's a list of just the basic high-level requirements. Each has, you know, of course, their own nuances and different requirements. This is just a high-level list of what's the minimum that will be required in order to qualify as one of the small business types. And so just remember that things are always changing. Unlike some industries, government contracting rules and developments are really fluid. I've heard it said that in government contracting, we cannot get out a recipe of the cookbook when you insert the ingredients on the checklist and get the same result. So keep in mind that you must stay current, and some of the ways you can do that is by attending webinars like this one. And these are also, again, posted on our website so you can review current information, as well as attending our seminars and workshops, making an appointment with a PTAC counselor, myself or Lenny Bean, in order to find out what changes may have, you know, may affect you, something that has come up that you're applying for now. Perhaps you know, started the process earlier and maybe the rules have changed, just to confirm that things are either the same or what the changes are. Attending GovCon conferences. So a lot of times they have industry experts there. They have government contracting attorneys that speak. They have those within the agencies that speak, and also talk particularly about their procurement, how they procure things, what their rules are. So those are always good to attend and kind of keep abreast of what's going on. And of course, what we're talking about here today, stay informed on FAR regulation changes and just FAR that impacts you. So, and Lenny covered that during our last session, but being familiar, of course, with the general FAR, but also for the agencies that you are planning to do business with. For instance, the Department of Defense has the DFARs that you should be familiar with. And now we're kind of going to get into detail on that pecking order that we talked about. So first of all, remember their primary goal is full and open competition. It's a requirement under the Competition and Contracting Act. And also just know that FAR Subpart 7.1.105B2 requires they write a description of how that competition will be sought, promoted, and sustained throughout the course of the acquisition. So here we're going to look at some full and open competition and what the exceptions to the rule are. So establish an alternative source. So they've already established a source that can basically provide this product or service that they are comfortable with and have already vetted. Set aside for small businesses, of course, like the ones we just spoke of. Maybe there's only one responsible source. So there's only one vendor, for example, that responded to the sources sought they put out. And that vendor was highly qualified. And so as far as from what they can see, that's the only responsible source. There's a compelling urgency, industrial mobilization, an international agreement, and it's required by statute or national security. But what's really the most common exception is public interest, of course, are set-asides. Set-asides for small business is the most common exception. And our small business professionals, meaning the small business specialists or small business professionals within the agencies, are important for us to know who they are and to establish relationships with them, because we are hoping that they can, and a lot of times they can, get a seat at the table when they are initially putting out this procurement. So when they're working on the planning, when the contracting officer is there, the program and manager is there stating what his requirements are, the small business specialist should be there also and state, well, yes, these are the requirements and I have these particular small businesses that can meet them. So it's important to know who your small business specialist or professional is and establish a relationship with them. So these are the rules all in FAR Part 19 for set-asides and sole source awards for small businesses. So here are the competitive procedures. One is a sealed bid. So this is typically something that is commonly procured and doesn't require necessarily a particular expertise. So a sealed bid, you're listing your price only, and it's basically based on lowest price. Competitive proposals, we're reviewing more about the details of what you can provide, how you're going to do the work. You know, just complete details in the outline on the RFP, what you need to respond to, which we'll talk a little bit about that also in later slides. And then a combination of competitive procedures, which could be a two-step bid process. Submit the proposal. We determine that these particular vendors are, you know, we want to choose from these two, and then look at the pricing as a separate issue. So what's involved? The bids are publicly open. I don't mean publicly meaning you or I will be there, but publicly opened with those on the procurement team. Then there's a determination of who's responsible, and we'll talk about responsive, and we'll talk about what those two are, I think, on the next slide. Whether or not it's advantageous to the government is also important. And an evaluation based on price and price-related factors. So sometimes, like I mentioned on the previous slide, this is a two-step process. So let's talk about the definitions of what these are. So responsiveness has to do with answering the mail. So you receive the RFP or the bid, and it states that this proposal should be no longer than 20 pages. You've met the margin guidelines. But beyond that, those are just, of course, just how you set up the proposal. Beyond that, as far as in the evaluation factors, for example, they may, list things that they are looking for, as far as what they're looking for in a responsible bidder. And have you addressed that in your response to the proposal? So those are basically how they evaluate whether or not you're responsive in a short manner, but not a complete flesh on what that is. But basically, that's what they're looking for, whether or not you are responsive. Whether or not you're responsible has to do with you. It has to do with your company, as far as does your company have adequate financial resources, for instance, to sustain delayed payment? That's a question we always ask you before we intake you. Do you have, are you able to comply with the delivery requirements? Do you have prior past performance? And is it, do you have good, satisfactory past performance? Do you have adequate facilities and equipment? These are just some of the things that they look at when they're determining if you are a responsible bidder. So understanding these concepts is key to understanding public sector contracting as well. Both are looking for public sector, as far as state and local, are also looking for responsible bidders. Okay, so when can competitive proposals be requested? So if a sealed bid is not appropriate, so for instance, and we'll talk about this a little later, engineering services. For instance, a sealed bid is not going to be appropriate there. We're going to want to learn more about the capabilities of the company and a more detail about their past performance and so forth. So it's also when details need to be negotiated, and it's generally is necessary to request proposals for professional services, just for example, like engineering services or even consulting services to some degree, because of, for instance, I'm thinking of, comes to mind like accounting or CPA. They know of what are the current regulations, what's current in the industry, and they may know what is the best way to solve the solution or to answer the problem that the government wants to address. So the trade-offs, some examples of trade-offs are work that can't be described clearly. So the government is open to getting the most cutting-edge product or service. They're looking for advanced system approaches. So another one is maybe the solution is generally unknown, so they're looking to you to provide that solution. So that's one of the trade-offs. And then also, when looking at this as a whole, lowest price technically acceptable, meaning technically acceptable has to have the best value, meaning it needs to meet the mail. It needs to provide the best service or the best, meet the quality standards that's required by the government. However, have the lowest price in order to do that. So the simplified acquisition process is used basically for small purchases between $3,500 and $150,000, and this is reserved exclusively for small business. So these are things, of course, that are relatively simple government requirements. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but architect and engineering services do not fall under the FAR's Part 13, 14, and 15. They fall under FAR Part 36. And that's because these are like, well, many fields, but highly specialized, and also are in many cases a matter of public safety. So recently I attended a construction workshop, and during that we reviewed some of the examples of where there was shoddy work done and people were killed or people were, hurt because of, not meeting the requirements of building. So this is why this is highly important, and this is selected process that's separated from the others, because it's based basically on qualifications. They want to make sure they have the most qualified firm first, and then they negotiate a fair and reasonable price. So we'll talk about contract categories, and we'll actually look at those specifically over the next couple of slides, but these are a couple of factors to consider: the cost of the performance and also the amount and the nature of the profit incentives offered to you. And those will be, basically, you'll see the difference when we review these different categories. So the two categories are fixed price and cost reimbursement. And each has their own subcategories within them, but these are the high-level categories. So here's fixed price contracts. Firm fixed price is what's most common, what you'll probably see most. Just basically saying that you have a set, the government is willing to pay up to a certain price, and that's it for whatever services. So this is where it's highly important, of course, to have done your due diligence, your estimations are correct, so that you don't end up basically charging less than what's really required to complete the work, because under a firm fixed price, you'll be required to complete it at that price. So these are there definitely a couple of other different versions, but you don't see them as much. Like, for instance, firm fixed price, level of effort. It's a firm fixed price, but after a certain level of effort, they're required to pay out. So just a little bit different version. Economic price adjustment number 2 kind of reminds me of what's done with GSA schedules, meaning maybe you have a set price of, I don't know, $50 for this particular product, and then it looks like the price to manufacture this product is increasing in the commercial sector. It's just increasing overall. So you submit a request to make a price adjustment in order to increase the price that you offer this for, because of changes within the industry. So cost reimbursement contracts are better for you, the vendor, but you don't see them as often. So cost plus, so there's basically the cost, and then plus would be your profit. So to make sure that you receive profit. Whereas a firm fixed price, if you didn't price it correctly, you may not receive profit. So I'll show you on the next slide. And these are a couple of, there may be an incentive, cost plus incentive, cost plus award fee. So these are just some other examples, but typically it'll just be cost plus is what you see most frequently. And then when do they use the incentive contracts? When a firm fixed price contract doesn't work. So, maybe they rely on you to provide a solution. So they're really not sure what the total cost of this, they haven't figured out what the cost of this will be. But they want you to start the work and kind of help them get to that point. So they may use something like a cost plus incentive type contract for that. And here's an example, or actually illustration, I should say, of where the risk is, where the risk lies. So for buyers, the risk is low if they use firm fixed price, like we just discussed. So that's on the far end. On the other end, if the seller's risk is low, if they use cost plus. So because you're guaranteed, for instance, on the seller's end in that example, a profit, because it's cost plus profit. And the other way, you're more limited. The government is able to control their costs more with a firm fixed price. And these are just some other forms of contracts. What I see a lot combined together is indefinite delivery, indefinite quantities, which is the IDIQ. And so that's a contract vehicle where they would issue, a blanket agreement that says we want to purchase XYZ or service XYZ over these, this is a contract for 5 years. However, you're not necessarily guaranteed any work under that. They would issue what they call a task order, and you would compete with other vendors who are been pre-approved to receive a task order. And a task order meaning you're tasked to do certain work or provide a certain product or service under that IDIQ. So they could be, of course, multi-year contracts, time and materials, maybe more so for like consulting. So these are just some other forms of contracts that they use. There may be options, like option years that they may or may not exercise. So having an initial year of where they're going to procure the service, and then they have an option to procure it in future years or not. So here we're looking at the contracting methods and implications for you as a contractor. So for instance, in a multi-year contract, here's the government's promise that they promise that they'll purchase more than 1 year's requirement, or they'll pay a cancellation charge if they don't. But on the other hand, the contractor is providing that they'll deliver more than 1 year's requirement. So just kind of being aware of what you are committing to. And for instance, we just talked about this indefinite delivery, well, this was definite quality, a quantity, or we have indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. So they would purchase, under that scenario, they purchase a minimum amount of supplies or services over a specified amount of time. And then the contractor promises to deliver supplies or services as specified up to the contract maximum. So the significance of a spec is that the agencies have this discretion to prepare their own specs, and they do that after they conduct the market research with hopefully you as involved as a response to a sources sought, or after participating in the industry day, or after having a small business specialist advocate for the services that you can provide. So, but these days, as we're mentioning here in this slide, it's like they're leaning more towards obtaining industry input as far as what is the best solution. So they may know the end goal, but they're looking for industry to provide best solutions. So this is, again, another opportunity for you to participate early and participate in those sources sought and industry days in order to help kind of direct, participate in and help in crafting the final solicitation. So the performance-based acquisition is basically structured around what we just talked about, the results to be achieved. They're looking for what the final results are and looking for you to kind of tell them what's the best avenue to provide it. So this is the preferred method for acquiring services. So this is just basically saying any opportunity 25,000 or more must be published on FedBizOpps. So that's considered the government-wide point of entry described in FAR 2.101. But basically it means anything over 25,000 or 25,000 and up must be posted to FBO. And of course, like I said, there's always certain exceptions to anything. I've seen, a few things that were larger than that weren't posted there. So there's always seems to be some types of exception. So, and here again, this is also a guideline. The notice must be published, at least 15 days before issuance of a solicitation or a proposed contract action. But sometimes there is something that's an urgent, immediate need. There's a shorter time frame. Sometimes it gets postponed for whatever reason. So there are other different scenarios that occur, but this is a general guideline that a notice should be published as a pre-solicitation at least 15 days prior to the issuance of the actual solicitation. So what's the response time that you can expect to have? 30 days would be, again, a guideline. However, it may be something where the item is needed more urgently, so the time frame could be shortened. Also, I see a lot of times the response time is extended. There are extensions granted because perhaps there are a lot of questions regarding to how to respond to solicitation. Maybe there are errors in how it was written up or something. Or maybe the contracting team won't be able to review it or put this on hold. So again, it may vary. This is just a guideline of 30 days. And in addition to favoring small businesses, and we're going to talk about this this is pretty much the last 4 slides, we'll talk about why they favor or how they favor using domestic end products and what that looks like. So first, we're going to talk about the laws. These labor laws, of course, are incorporated in other local or state as well, some of them, but they're also incorporated in the federal government. So this is for protection of employees that work on government contracts. So I'm sure a lot of you, if you're working in construction, are familiar with the Davis-Bacon Act using prevailing wage. Also applicable here. Same thing with the Fair Labor Standards Act, Service Contract Act, and the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act. All of these are applicable here as well. The Service Contract Act really speaks to, even though, for instance, a professional services company, so perhaps the CPA himself would not qualify, would not be set to these minimum wage standards, minimum wages and fringe, safe working conditions, so forth. But this was speaking more of the administrative staff, for instance. So those working at the lower levels would be subject to Service Contract Act. The Buy American Act, it restricts the purchase of supplies that are not domestic end products. And by end, I mean that in the end, they're transformed and finalized in the U.S. So perhaps you purchased some of the, the parts for the final product from a trade-friendly country, and then you transferred them over to U.S. and then you assembled it here. That will be considered made in America. So just being kind of familiar with what the rules are and that there are exceptions that allow purchase of certain foreign end products. So you'd have to look at FAR 25.001 or 25.101 for complete details on that. So the Trade Agreements Act is basically countries that we have a trade agreement with. So we have a list of countries where we have a trade agreement with, and that you can purchase products from those countries. And so a Balance of Payments Act refers to construction of material that you're using for work that's performed outside of the U.S. So making sure that the materials that you use, your U.S. company, the materials that you use are domestic construction material, even though you're performing the work outside of the U.S. So let's talk about what we just learned. We talked a lot about market research as far as the importance of that, how the government is required to conduct market research, how you can get involved as far as responding to sources sought, also participating in industry days. We talked about the sources and the strategies, sources meaning, what vendors are, how we're going to compete this, and the strategy for the acquisition, how we're going to streamline it. We talked about the preference for commercial items and other preferences. So we talked about how the government truly prefers to use items that are in commercial use and how they define in the FAR what's considered a commercial product. We talk about the competition requirements as far as full and open being the first order of business, but how small business gets involved. We talked about how they evaluate bids and proposals as far as looking at, and sometimes it could be a two-step process, looking at your proposal, how you perform the work, and then evaluating your price, that the bid is open publicly. So those are some of the things we covered. And we talked about contract categories and types. So we talked about firm fixed price, the different types of contracts under firm fixed. And then we talked about cost contracts, so like cost plus contracts and so forth. And finally, we talked about, but not necessarily in this order, socioeconomic programs. So we talked about the different small business programs, small business, 8A, woman-owned, the different socioeconomic programs available. And we talked a bit about what the high-level requirements are that you need to meet in order to qualify. So what we talked about here is market research, identifying sources, acquisition strategies. I kind of just went over what we talked about generally. In the next two presentations, we'll get more involved with contract administration, contract awards, debriefings, and protests. And so those will be coming in our FAR series part 3 and 4. And here's a list of our upcoming workshops. So part 3 is how a contract is created using the FAR. So we first talked about what is the FAR, how to become familiar with the rules. Then we talked about how they plan the contracts. And now we'll talk about how in part 3, how the contract is actually created. In part 4, we'll move on to talk about how the government agencies administer the contracts. So that's 3 and 4 coming up in June. But before that, in May, we'll have 3 in-person workshops. First one being Becoming Contract Ready in Reading on May 15th, and the same seminar on the next day in Eureka on May 16th. And then finally on the 17th, we'll have the NorCal Business Matchmaker in Vallejo, and that's an opportunity for you to meet the primes, the agencies, federal, state, and local, and have a 10-minute business matchmaking session with them. So I encourage you, if you are in that area, to sign up if you haven't done so already. And all the above events, as it says on our screen, are free. So thank you so much for participating today and just bearing with us that we had a few technical difficulties there. And if you could please complete the evaluation form, that'll be sent to you right after the presentation. And also the slides and the audio will be available as well on our website, as Christina Kunkel mentioned. So with that, I will take your questions. And okay. I knew I had some questions up here, but they were just regarding when we were having our audio difficulties. Any questions, type them in the box there. Okay, I have a question here. Have you thought about providing an online forum to help small businesses partner up on bids? Well, I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I don't have authorization to do that, but I think that's an excellent idea. A lot of times we get questions from companies about, you know, looking for instance, there's a new all small mentor protege program. Well, how do I find one? So there's definitely room there for some type of program to connect either small businesses or small and large with appropriate partners. Where do we sign up for the business matchmaking event? You can go to our website, and there's a list of events, I believe, on the left-hand side, and you can click on that to register. And then once you've registered, you'll start to receive updates when we send out notifications of which buyers will be attending, also how you should be prepared in order to sign up at the business matchmaking event that day to sign up to meet with certain, with whichever agencies you'd like to meet with. Well, again, you'll receive this audio and video afterwards. Let's see, I have another question coming in here. Do you keep an online roster of small businesses signed up for your events to help us network prior to the event? I think that would be a question better answered by Christina Kunkel.
Sure. So all of our clients sign a confidentiality statement. So sharing their names prior to the event is against our conflict of interest policy. Our confidentiality policy. However, we do list all of the agencies that are signed up and the prime contractors. So you can definitely prepare for the event in advance by looking at the agencies that are attending. That wouldn't be a problem at all. And that's all on the Eventbrite page that you can access from our website.
Okay, did that answer your question? Okay, I see there's another question from Brian about how to deal with the Government for Dummies CD. There probably are products out there like that. I know there are, at minimum, there are books out there like that. But again, like I mentioned, things change all the time. So if you have a CD and you kind of study it and learn that, by the time you probably start bidding or somewhere during the process, things will change. So I don't think there's one static document that you can reference. Let's see, quick reference table for the various types of government contracts. You know what? I can actually put something together for you or direct you, but offhand, we don't have anything available. But if you could get in contact with Christina Kunkel and we can speak, I can probably put something together for you. Okay. Thank you all for attending, and I hope this was helpful. And again, like I mentioned, it'll be available for you to review if I move too fast, the audio and as well as the slides. And of course, if you need individual assistance or with something particular, be in contact with Christina Kunkel, and she will direct you to myself or Lenny, and we can assist you one-on-one. Okay, I don't think there are any more questions. So thank you again for attending and have a great day.